Look at a map of the ancient world in 323 BCE. You'll see one of history's most impressive empires. Alexander the Great's domain spanned from Greece to India, encompassing 5 million square kilometers across 3 continents. He's conquered Persia, the superpower of his age. He's taken Egypt and been declared a living god. He's crossed deserts and mountains that no Western army had ever seen. He never lost a battle. But there's something odd about this map. There's a gap, a significant gap, right next to Alexander's homeland of Macedonia. Just a few hundred miles away sits a city he never touched, never attacked, never even attempted to conquer. Rome, the city that would become the greatest empire the Western world had ever seen, the city that would dominate Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East for centuries, the civilization that gave us roads, aqueducts, Latin, and the foundations of Western law. Alexander never went near it. Why? Was he afraid of Rome? Did he not know about it? Or is there something else going on here? Something that reveals a profound truth about ambition, time, and the cruel reality that even the greatest conquerors are racing against the clock? Today we're going to answer one of history's most fascinating questions, and the answer isn't what most people think. Before we can understand why Alexander never invaded Rome, we need to grasp a crucial aspect of timing, because here's what most people get wrong. When we think about Rome, we automatically imagine the Roman Empire, the Colosseum, Julius Caesar, legions marching across Europe, roads stretching from Britain to Egypt, an empire that lasted nearly 500 years and shaped everything we know about Western civilization. But that's not the Rome that existed during Alexander's lifetime. Not even close. Let me give you the timeline. Alexander was born in 356 BCE. He became king of Macedonia in 336 BCE at just 20 years old. He died in 323 BCE at age 32. During those 13 years of his reign, most of which he spent at war, Rome was not an empire. It wasn't even a major power. It was barely on the map of importance. Rome in 330 BCE was a city-state. One city controls some territory around it. It was still fighting wars just to dominate the Italian peninsula. It was engaged in conflicts with neighboring tribes, the Samnites, the Etruscans, and other Italian peoples. Rome was regional at best and struggling at that. Rome wouldn't become a true Mediterranean power until about 100 years after Alexander's death. The Roman Empire as we know it, with emperors, with legions conquering Gaul and Britain, with roads connecting the known world, that wouldn't exist for another 300 years. So when we ask, why didn't Alexander conquer Rome? We're actually asking the wrong question. We're looking at history backwards, projecting Rome's future greatness onto a time when it didn't exist yet. It's like asking in the year 1800, why didn't Napoleon conquer the United States? Well, because the United States in 1800 was a small nation of maybe 5 million people, confined to the eastern seaboard, not yet a continental power, certainly not a superpower. There were bigger, richer, more strategically important targets. That was Rome during Alexander's time. Now let's talk about Alexander himself and what drove him. This was a young man who inherited the throne at 20 and immediately had to prove himself. His father, Philip II, had been assassinated under mysterious circumstances. Several neighboring kingdoms saw this untested young king as weak. Some Greek city-states tried to break free from Macedonian control, thinking they had their chance. Alexander's response was devastating and immediate. He crushed rebellions with shocking speed. He marched his army south and destroyed the city of Thebes completely, wiping it off the map as a warning to anyone else considering revolt. By age 22, he had secured his kingdom and was ready to embark on the great campaign his father had planned, the invasion of Persia. And this is absolutely critical to understanding why Rome never entered the picture. You have to understand Alexander's priorities, his motivations, and what drove every decision he made. Persia was everything. Persia wasn't just any enemy, it was the enemy, the historical, generational, existential enemy of the entire Greek world. The Persians had invaded Greece multiple times over the previous century. They'd burned Athens to the ground in 480 BCE. Every Greek child grew up hearing stories of the Persian Wars, the 300 Spartans at Thermopylae, the naval victory at Salamis, the triumph at Marathon. The Persians represented everything the Greeks defined themselves against. They were the ultimate foreign threat, the empire that had tried to extinguish Greek independence. But Persia wasn't just symbolic, it was also practically the most attractive target imaginable. First, Persia was unimaginably wealthy. The Persian Empire controlled the major trade routes of the ancient world. Gold flowed through Persian treasuries. Their palaces were legendary for their opulence. Conquering Persia meant capturing more wealth than Alexander could spend in 10 lifetimes. Second, Persia was militarily vulnerable. Despite its size, the Persian military hadn't modernized. They relied on massive armies of conscripts, on overwhelming numbers rather than tactical sophistication. Alexander knew the Macedonian phalanx, the revolutionary military formation his father had perfected, could defeat Persian forces even when heavily outnumbered. Third, conquering Persia meant glory that would echo through history. It meant avenging Greece. It meant surpassing every hero of myth and legend. It meant proving himself greater than Achilles, greater than Heracles, greater than anyone who had ever lived. So, if you're Alexander, 20 years old, burning with ambition, with the greatest army in the Western world at your command, where do you go? West to Italy to fight some minor city-state that controls part of one peninsula? A city with modest wealth and no particular strategic importance? Or east to Persia, to conquer the richest, most powerful empire on earth? To avenge your ancestors? To achieve immortal glory? The answer was obvious. Alexander went east, and he never looked back. For 11 years, Alexander marched deeper and deeper into Asia. Let me walk you through this journey because it explains why Rome never entered his thinking. 334 BCE, he crosses into Asia Minor, modern Turkey, with about 40,000 men. He wins his first major victory against Persian forces at the Granicus River. The campaign has begun. 333 BCE, Battle of Issus. Alexander faces Persian King Darius III directly for the first time. Despite being outnumbered, Alexander's tactical genius wins the day. Darius abandons his army and flees. Alexander captures the Persian king's family, his treasury, everything. The momentum is entirely with him. 332 BCE, he turns south, conquering Syria and the Phoenician cities, then Egypt. And the Egyptians, who hated Persian rule, welcomed him as a liberator. Egyptian priests declare him pharaoh, proclaim him the son of the god Amun-Ra. Alexander, at 24 years old, is being declared a living deity by one of the world's oldest civilizations. He founded Alexandria in Egypt, which would become one of history's greatest cities, a center of learning and culture for 1,000 years. 331 BCE, he returns to face Darius again. The Battle of Gaugamela in what's now Iraq. This is the decisive confrontation. Darius has assembled a massive army with war chariots, war elephants, and every advantage he can muster. Alexander still wins. Darius flees again and is later murdered by his own men. At 25 years old, Alexander is now king of Persia, king of Asia. But he doesn't stop. That's the key thing to understand about Alexander. He never stopped. 327 BCE, he pushes deeper into Central Asia, modern-day Afghanistan, Uzbekistan, and Tajikistan. He's fighting in mountains and deserts that no Western army has ever penetrated. He founds new cities. He marries a Bactrian princess. He keeps going east. 327 BCE, he crosses into India. He faces King Porus, who deploys war elephants. The battle is brutal, but Alexander wins. And then, finally, for the first time in his career, his army tells him no. They're exhausted. They're homesick. They've been marching and fighting for 8 years. They're 11,000 miles from Macedonia. They refuse to go further. Alexander is furious. He locks himself in his tent for 3 days, hoping his men will change their minds. They don't. For the first and only time, Alexander has to retreat. Notice the pattern here. For 11 straight years, every single campaign went east or south, into Persia, into Egypt, into Central Asia, into India, never west, never toward Italy, never toward Rome. It's not that Alexander was ignoring Rome. He literally hadn't thought about it. Rome wasn't on the route to glory. Rome wasn't on the path to world conquest. Rome was behind him, a minor settlement in a region he'd already moved past. But here's where the story gets truly fascinating. Alexander begins the long march back to Babylon, which he's made his new capital. It's 323 BCE. He's 32 years old. He's conquered everything from Greece to India. He's created the largest empire the world has ever seen. And now, finally, he's planning to look west. According to ancient sources, particularly the Roman historian Quintus Curtius Rufus, writing a few centuries later but drawing on earlier accounts, Alexander had begun planning a new campaign. He'd conquered the east. Now he wanted the west. The historical records mention specific preparations. Alexander ordered the construction of 700 warships. 700. That's an absolutely enormous naval force, larger than anything the Mediterranean world had seen. You don't build 700 warships for a minor expedition. His targets? The Western Mediterranean, Carthage, a wealthy Phoenician city-state in North Africa, Sicily, the rich island that controlled the central Mediterranean trade, southern Italy, and yes, eventually Rome itself. This makes perfect strategic sense. Alexander had conquered the eastern Mediterranean basin. The logical next step was the western Mediterranean. If he controlled both, he'd control the entire ancient world's economy, every trade route, every source of wealth, everything. And Rome, by this point in the early 320s BCE, was starting to look more interesting than it had been. It had grown. It now controlled a significant portion of Italy. It was becoming a regional power. Not a great power yet, but no longer completely insignificant. But here's the crucial question. Could Alexander have actually conquered Rome? Military historians generally agree on this. Yes, if Alexander had lived and invaded Italy in the late 320s or 310s BCE, Rome almost certainly would have fallen. Why? The Romans at this time were good soldiers, but they hadn't yet developed the military innovations that would later make them legendary. They hadn't perfected the flexible legion system that could adapt to any enemy. They were still using relatively rigid formations, similar to Greek phalanxes, but without Macedonia's centuries of experience. They'd never faced anyone like Alexander. The combination of the Macedonian phalanx with Alexander's cavalry tactics, his ability to create breakthroughs and exploit them with devastating speed, would have been overwhelming. More importantly, Rome had no experience with the scale of warfare Alexander represented. The Romans were fighting other Italian city-states in battles with thousands of men. Alexander commanded armies of tens of thousands of veterans who'd fought across 3 continents. If Rome had fallen to Alexander, the entire trajectory of Western civilization would have changed. The Roman Republic was slowly conquering the Mediterranean. No Punic Wars with Carthage. No Roman Empire spreading Latin and Roman law across Europe. No roads lead to Rome because Rome never becomes important. Christianity, which spread via Roman roads and Roman organization, developed completely differently, or perhaps not at all, in its recognizable form. Everything would be different. But in June 323 BCE, Alexander got sick. The accounts vary in details, but the basic story is consistent. Alexander attended a banquet. He drank heavily. He was famous for his drinking. Over the next few days, he developed a high fever, then severe abdominal pain. Then he lost the ability to speak. Then he couldn't move. 10 days after the symptoms started, Alexander the Great was dead, 32 years old. One of history's greatest conquerors died at an age when most people today are just starting their careers. What killed him? We honestly don't know. The ancient sources mention fever, which could mean many things. Modern historians have proposed malaria, typhoid fever, poisoning by rivals, or complications from years of battle wounds combined with chronic heavy drinking. His liver might have been damaged. His body might have been weakened from a decade of extreme physical stress. Any infection could become fatal. The exact cause doesn't matter as much as the result. Alexander died without a clear successor. He supposedly said the empire should go to the strongest, which wasn't exactly a detailed succession plan. What followed was 40 years of brutal warfare as his generals, the Diadochi, fought each other to carve up his empire. The unified empire never existed again. Instead, it fragmented into several Hellenistic kingdoms, the Ptolemaic kingdom in Egypt, the Seleucid Empire in Persia and the Middle East, the Antigonid dynasty in Macedonia, and others. And those 700 warships Alexander had ordered? Never used for their intended purpose. The Western campaign? Completely abandoned. The invasion of Rome? Never happened. Rome, which had been nervously watching the greatest military commander in history assemble a massive invasion fleet, suddenly didn't need to worry. The threat disappeared. Rome could continue its slow expansion through Italy, building the systems and institutions that would eventually make it great. Rome was saved by a fever. So what can we learn from this story? First, time is the ultimate constraint. Alexander had the capability, the resources, and eventually the intention to conquer Rome. But he ran out of time. He thought he had decades ahead of him. He was planning campaigns that would take years. Then a fever killed him, which are 10 days. This is true for all of us. We have limited time. We have more ambitions than we can possibly achieve. The question isn't just what you want to accomplish. It's what you can accomplish with the time you actually have, and none of us know how much that is. Second, priorities shape history. Alexander chose to pursue glory in the East before consolidating the West. That choice was entirely rational, given what he knew. Persia was richer, more prestigious, more meaningful, but it meant Rome was never on his agenda when he had time. Every choice to do something is also a choice not to do something else. Are you pursuing the right goals with your limited time? Third, systems outlast individuals. Alexander was a genius who achieved more in 32 years than most could in 100. But he built an empire entirely dependent on his personal charisma and tactical brilliance. The moment he died, it collapsed. Rome, by contrast, was built by many people over many generations. No single Roman was as brilliant as Alexander, but the institutions they created, the Senate, Roman law, the professional legions, the system of governance, lasted for centuries. In our own lives and organizations, are you building something that depends entirely on you? Or are you creating structures and systems that can continue without you? Fourth, knowing when to stop matters. Alexander never learned this lesson. He pushed his army until they mutinied. He took reckless risks in battle. He drove himself to physical and mental exhaustion. His inability to consolidate, to pause, to build sustainable structures meant his achievements died with him. Sometimes the greatest strength is knowing when enough is enough. So, to answer our original question, why didn't Alexander the Great invade Rome? He didn't invade Rome because Rome wasn't worth invading when he was looking east, toward greater glory and greater wealth, and when he finally turned his attention west, when he began assembling the largest invasion fleet the ancient world had seen, when Rome was finally on his list of targets, he died. At 32 years old, with decades of ambition still ahead of him, with 700 warships being built, with plans to conquer the Western Mediterranean and complete his domination of the known world. Alexander died of a fever in Babylon, and all those plans, the Western campaign, the conquest of Carthage, the invasion of Rome, the completion of his vision, died with him. It's one of history's great what-ifs. If Alexander had lived another 20 years, there might be no Rome as we know it, no Roman Empire, no Latin spreading across Europe, no Roman law, no roads leading to Rome. The entire course of Western civilization might have been unrecognizably different. But history isn't made of what-ifs. It's made of what actually happened. And what happened is that a young conqueror, at the peak of his power, planning his next great campaign, ran out of time. It's a stark reminder that even the greatest among us are racing against the clock. Even a genius has limits. Even the mighty must eventually stop. The question that matters is, what will you do with the time you have? If you enjoyed this deep dive into one of history's great mysteries, hit that like button and subscribe for more explorations of how the past shapes our present. And let me know in the comments. If you had 13 years to achieve your greatest ambitions, what would you pursue? And what are you putting off that you shouldn't? Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.